Have you ever given everything you had, your time, your savings, your heart, to someone who couldn't even look you in the eye and say thank you? I'm 63 years old. I raised my son alone. I worked double shifts at a hospital linen facility for 11 years. Came home, smelling like bleach and fabric softener, and I still made dinner every night. Still helped with homework. Still showed up to every single school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that mattered. When my husband Leonard passed from a stroke in 2009, my son Terrell was only 14. And I remember the night of the funeral, after everyone went home. And the casserole dishes were stacked on the counter, and the house was so quiet it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Terrell climbed into bed beside me and whispered, "Mom, if something happens to you too, what do I do?" I pulled him close and told him nothing was going to happen to me. I had no intention of going anywhere. I had a boy to raise. I kept that promise for years. I kept it through his high school graduation, through his 2 semesters at community college, before he decided it wasn't for him, through every job he started and didn't finish, every apartment he moved into and out of before the lease was up. I kept believing in Terrell the way only a mother can, with a kind of stubborn, irrational love that doesn't ask for proof. Then he met Brianna Weston. I want to be careful here, because I'm not the kind of woman who blames everything on the wife. I've seen enough of life to know it's never that simple. But I also know what I saw. And what I saw from the very first Thanksgiving she came to my house was a woman who looked at everything I owned and calculated its worth. She was polished. I'll give her that. Shea butter skin and press-on nails that always looked fresh. And she wore her hair natural and talked about self-care and abundance like they were scripture. She called me Miss Wanda the first few times, which I thought was respectful. Then somewhere around month 3 of their relationship, she dropped the miss and just called me Wanda. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was a generational thing. Terrell was 31 when they got together. She was 28. They moved fast. Within 8 months they were engaged, and within 14 they were married in a ceremony that I, somehow, ended up helping to finance. That's where it started. And I should have seen it, but I didn't. Or maybe I did see it and I just didn't want to believe it, because that's what love does to you. It makes you look away from the things that scare you. The wedding budget was $42,000. I know that sounds obscene. Believe me, I know. But Brianna had a vision. She'd been saving photos on her phone for years. A whole folder labeled Our Day, and when she showed it to me, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. There was a venue with chandeliers. A florist who charged by the stem. A photographer whose rate was more than I made in a month. Terrell sat beside her on my couch with his hands between his knees, not quite looking at me, while she walked me through the slideshow on her phone. I said, "Terrell, baby, what's your budget for this?" He said, "We're still working it out." That was code, I came to understand, for we were hoping you'd cover most of it. I had about $60,000 in savings at the time. Money I had built up slowly, painfully, over decades. Rainy day money, retirement money. Money I told myself I would use to finally visit my sister in Savannah, to fix the back porch, to breathe a little easier in my old age. I gave them $22,000 for the wedding. I told myself it was a gift, a one-time thing. It was not a one-time thing. After the wedding, they rented an apartment in a part of town I couldn't have afforded at their age. 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, roof access. Brianna decorated it off of some home account she followed. Linen throw pillows, a dining table that seated 8, even though they never had 8 people over. Terrell was working at the time, doing IT support for a company downtown, and Brianna had a job doing social media for a local boutique. Between the two of them, they earned decent money. Not $42,000 wedding money, but decent. The calls started small. Terrell would phone me on a Tuesday and say, "Mom, you know that check you were going to send for the car insurance?" I didn't remember saying I was going to send anything for car insurance, but somehow it had been decided. Somehow in a conversation I only half remembered, I had agreed to help. And I did help, because I am his mother and I love him, and the insurance was going to lapse. Then it was the security deposit on a storage unit. Then new tires. Then in the spring of 2021, it was the down payment on a condo. I need you to understand something. By this point I had given them, piece by piece, over $30,000. I had not been asked to sit down and look at a spreadsheet. I had not been given a repayment plan. I had not been thanked in any way that felt like it cost them something. The money just disappeared into their life, the way water disappears into dry ground. And they kept living the way they lived, and I kept sending what I could. And every time I wondered whether I should say something, I would call Terrell, and he'd answer in that warm, easy voice he has, the one that still sounds like my little boy. And he'd say, "Mom, you know I appreciate you." And I would let myself believe that was enough. The condo changed things. That was the line I didn't mean to cross, but crossed anyway. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a complex with a gym and a pool and a concierge. Their mortgage was going to be close to $2,000 a month. Terrell told me. The down payment was $28,000. I told him I didn't have $28,000. He said, "Mom, what about your retirement account?" I remember sitting in my kitchen when he said that. I was eating toast. I put the toast down. "Terrell," I said slowly, "that money is for when I'm old." "You're not old," he said, and he laughed a little. Like that was a funny thing to say. I was 61 years old. I had high blood pressure and a bad knee, and some mornings I could barely get out of bed until my body remembered what year it was. I was not old in the way he meant it, but I was old in the way that matters. Old enough to know that the years between now and the end move faster than the ones before. I said I would think about it. I didn't sleep that night. In the end, I gave them $15,000. Not from my retirement. I drew that line, at least. From what was left of my savings. I told myself this was the last time. I said it out loud, in my kitchen, alone, like making a vow to the walls. 2 months after they moved into the condo, Brianna got pregnant. I cried when Terrell told me. Happy tears, the real kind. The kind that sneak up on you before you can decide whether to let them out. I was going to be a grandmother. Whatever else was happening, whatever complicated feelings, I was carrying about money and boundaries and being taken for granted. None of that touched the part of me that lit up at the word grandmother. I started planning immediately. I bought a soft yellow blanket the week they announced it. I kept it folded on my dresser. I called Brianna to congratulate her. She was warm on the phone, warmer than usual, and I remember thinking, maybe this is the thing that changes everything. Maybe a baby makes people grow up, makes them realize what matters. I believed that for a while. The baby arrived in October. A boy. They named him Carter. I drove to the hospital the day he was born. I sat in that waiting room for 4 hours with a bag of things I'd brought, the yellow blanket, a little stuffed elephant, a card I'd written front to back. When Terrell finally came out to get me, he looked exhausted and proud, and more like himself than he had in years. He hugged me in the hallway, and I felt, for a moment, like we were back to the way things used to be. Then we walked into the room. Brianna was sitting up in the bed holding Carter, and there were her parents on one side of her. Her mother Darlene and her stepfather Ray, and 2 of her girlfriends on the chairs along the wall. The room was full. It was a lot of people for a hospital room, and I could see in Brianna's face that she was tired, and I told myself I would keep it brief. I just wanted to see the baby. I just wanted to hold him for 1 minute. I stood near the bed and said something like, "He is just beautiful, Brianna. You did so good." And I meant it. Carter was round-cheeked and new and perfect, and I could feel my heart doing that thing where it gets too big for your chest. I reached out my hands. Brianna shifted away from me. Just slightly, not dramatic, not a scene. Just a small movement, like a door closing quietly. She said, "He just fell asleep. I don't want to disturb him." I nodded. I stepped back. I thought, okay, later. But later didn't come. Her mother held Carter. Her 2 girlfriends held Carter, passing him back and forth. Her stepfather Ray even held Carter, briefly, and he looked uncomfortable doing it, like he was holding a fragile piece of furniture. I stood on my side of the room with my yellow blanket folded over my arm and I watched, and I told myself there was a reason. Maybe Brianna was protective. Maybe she had read something about germs or overstimulation. Maybe I was reading into it. When visiting hours ended, Terrell walked me to the elevator. I asked if everything was okay. He said, "Of course, Mom. She's just tired." I drove home and sat in my driveway for a long time. That was the first time. It happened again at the 1-week visit. They came to my house. But Brianna held Carter through the whole visit, and when I asked if I could hold him, she said he was getting fussy and might need to nurse soon. He was sleeping at the time. He was not fussy. He was sleeping with his little fist against his cheek, and I could see him breathing from across the room, and I did not get to hold my grandson. I mentioned it to my friend Cecily. Not Cecily from the church. The other one, Cecily Pruitt, who I've known since we worked together at the hospital. And she looked at me with that look that says she already knows something I'm still figuring out. "Wanda," she said, "have you considered that Brianna doesn't like you?" I said, "She has no reason not to like me." Cecily said, "That's never stopped anyone." I went home and thought about it. And the more I thought about it, the more things started rearranging themselves in my memory. The way Brianna would go quiet when I made suggestions, the way certain topics made her face go flat and polite, the way she and Terrell would exchange looks sometimes, quick and private, like I was a situation they were managing. But I kept helping. I don't know how to explain that to someone who hasn't been in it. When you love someone the way I love Terrell, the helping is just automatic, like breathing. You don't think, "Should I do this?" Even when it hurts you. Even when you can feel something isn't right. That November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Terrell called and asked if I could help with their HOA fees and a credit card payment that had gotten away from them. The total was a little over $3,000. I had $1,200 in my checking account. I told him that. He went quiet for a moment, then said, "What about your savings?" I told him the savings were gone. He said, "All of it?" Like he genuinely didn't know. Like the past 2 years hadn't happened. Like $22,000 for the wedding and $15,000 for the condo, and all the smaller things in between had somehow slipped his mind. "Terrell," I said, "you know where the money went." He got quiet again. Then he said, "Brianna's really stressed, Mom. The baby and the bills. It's a lot right now." I said, "I understand that, but I don't have it." We got off the phone and I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not from sadness exactly, more from a feeling like something finally becoming clear, a fog lifting. And underneath the fog, what I saw was this. I had spent 2 years making their life comfortable while my own slipped further and further from the one I had planned. I had $1,200. I had a retirement account I hadn't touched but also hadn't added to in 2 years because I kept giving away what I meant to save. I had a back porch that still needed fixing, and a sister in Savannah I still hadn't visited, and a body that was 62 years old and not getting younger. And I had a grandson I had never held. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Everything else I could maybe explain away, rationalize, make peace with. But Carter, my blood, the little boy with Terrell's forehead, and what looked like his grandfather Leonard's hands. I had never held him. He was 6 weeks old and I had never held him. I made a decision that night. Not impulsively, I want to be clear about that. I sat with it for 3 days. I called Cecily Pruitt. I talked to my sister, Patricia Ann, who said, "Baby, I've been waiting for you to come to your senses." Like she'd had this speech ready for months. And then I called my bank. I went through every transaction I could find. Every transfer, every check, every Zelle payment going back to the engagement. When I added it all up, the total was $41,220. I'm going to say that again. $41,000 over 2 years. Into a household with 2 working adults. Into a lifestyle that included a concierge building and linen throw pillows, and a photographer who charged by the stem. I did not call Terrell with that number. Instead, I called a financial advisor, a woman named Gloria Hendricks, who a colleague from the hospital had recommended years ago, and I'd never actually gone to see. I sat across from Gloria Hendricks in her small, tidy office, and I put a folder on her desk with printed bank statements, and I said, "I need to understand where I stand." She went through the statements carefully. She didn't say much. When she looked up, she asked how old I was, and when I said 62, she pressed her lips together in a way that told me something before she said anything. "You need to stop," she said. Not slow down. Stop. She helped me understand that at my income and my age, with my retirement account the size it was, I could not absorb any more losses. Not if I wanted to retire before 70. Not if I wanted any kind of stability in my later years. Every dollar I had sent to Terrell and Brianna was a dollar my future self would have to do without. I thanked her. I drove home. I sat in my kitchen again. I do a lot of my living in that kitchen, and I thought about who I was and what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And then I started making changes. The first thing I did was write Terrell a letter. Not a text, not a phone call. A letter. Because I needed to say it clearly, and I needed him to be able to read it more than once. I told him what I was feeling. I told him I loved him and I always would. I told him I was proud of who he was capable of being. And I told him, plainly and without anger, that I had given all I could give and that I was stopping. I told him I would like to be invited to spend real time with Carter, that I would like to hold my grandson's son, that I hoped we could figure out a way to have a relationship that didn't run through my bank account. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday. I didn't hear back for 9 days. When Terrell called, he sounded different. Flat, like all the warmth had been ironed out. He said he'd read the letter and he thought I was being dramatic. He said they had always planned to pay me back. He said Brianna was upset, that she felt like I was making their financial stress about me, that I had chosen a really hard time in their lives to pull back. Pull back. Like I was a tide. I told him I understood if he was upset. I told him I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I told him that the door to my home and my heart was always open to him and to Carter. But I held my line. The months that followed were the hardest of my life since Leonard died. Terrell went distant. The calls stopped. Brianna stopped responding to my texts. Christmas came and I was not invited to their home. I sent Carter a gift, a soft blue rabbit, because blue is the color Terrell had in his room as a baby. And I don't know if he ever got it. I spent Christmas with Patricia Ann in Savannah, finally, after all those years of saying I would go. She picked me up from the airport and held me for a long time in the arrivals hall and didn't say a word about being right. That's love, the real kind. She just held me. Spring came. I fixed the back porch. I hired a man named Jerome to do the work, and it took him 4 days and it cost me $900. And I sat out there on a Wednesday afternoon in April with a cup of coffee, and I cried a little, because the porch was so much better than it had been, and I had been looking at that broken step for 4 years, and somehow I'd had the money for it the whole time. I just hadn't spent it on myself. In June, Terrell called. He didn't call to apologize, not exactly. He called because things had gotten difficult. The HOA had placed a lien on the condo. The credit card debt had grown. And then, this is the part that I had not known, the part that came out slowly over the course of a very long and painful phone call. It turned out that Brianna had opened a credit card in both their names without telling Terrell. She had used it to cover expenses that were not what he thought they were. A shopping habit that had gotten out of control. Packages arriving while he was at work. Returns that never happened. He found out because a collections notice came to the house. I listened to him talk for almost an hour. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything that sounded like that. I just listened, the way I used to when he was 14, and trying to figure out how the world worked. When he was done, he said very quietly, "Mom, I'm sorry." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "I know, baby." He came to see me the following Saturday. He came alone. Brianna was at her mother's, and he brought Carter. He stood on my front porch holding that little boy, and Carter was looking around at everything with the enormous seriousness that 8-month-olds have about the world. And Terrell said, "Can we come in?" I held my arms out. Not to Terrell, to Carter. Terrell understood. He placed that baby in my arms for the first time, 8 months after he was born, and Carter looked at my face with those big, unsettled eyes, and then he grabbed my thumb and held it. I don't have words for that. I'm not going to try to find them. We sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. Terrell talked. I talked. We cried some. Not dramatically. Just the quiet kind that comes when something that's been held too long finally gets set down. He told me he hadn't understood what he was doing. Not the money, he knew about the money, but the other thing. The way he had let me be treated like a resource instead of a person. The way he had not stood between me and Brianna's coldness. The way he had not once, in those 2 years, said to her, "That's my mother. She gets to hold her grandson." He said he didn't know why he hadn't. He thought it was easier not to. He thought he was keeping the peace. I told him I understood, and I did. I understand the way love can make you into a smaller version of yourself when you're not paying attention. Terrell and Brianna separated that summer. It was not something I caused, and it's not something I celebrate. A marriage ending is a sad thing regardless of the circumstances, and Carter deserves his parents, both of them. What I know is that Terrell moved into a small apartment in August and started rebuilding his finances slowly. With a budget and a plan, The way I taught him when he was young and briefly paid attention. The legal matters with Brianna took time. There was a credit card company and a collections agency and some conversations with an attorney, a man named Sherman Boateng, who was sharp and kind and didn't let Terrell be bulldozed. In the end, there was a settlement. I don't know all the details, and that's Terrell's business, not mine. What I know is that it was settled, that there were consequences, that things did not simply disappear into the comfortable past the way wrongdoing sometimes does. I did not get my $41,000 back. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to end this story with a check in the mail and a neat resolution, because that's not what happened. What I got back was something harder to name. I got back a relationship with my son. I got back my grandson. I got back, slowly and imperfectly, a sense of myself as a person with value that had nothing to do with what I could provide. Carter is 14 months old now. He comes to my house every other Saturday with Terrell, and we have a routine. I make pancakes, Carter makes a mess, Terrell does the dishes. Carter has learned to pull himself up on my coffee table, and he stands there looking enormously proud of himself, which is a personality trait he gets from his father. He calls me something that sounds like mama, but Terrell insists means grandma, and honestly, I don't care what it means. I just like the sound of it. My back porch is fixed. I've been to Savannah twice. I'm seeing Gloria Hendricks every quarter now, and my retirement looks better than it did 2 years ago. I still have the yellow blanket. I gave it to Carter on one of his first visits. He sleeps with it now, Terrell tells me. He won't sleep without it. I bought it before I even knew him, before I had held him once. I bought it because I already loved him, and love that early doesn't ask for anything back. It just reaches towards someone and hopes. I think about that sometimes, about how much of love is just that, reaching, hoping, and how the hardest lesson I ever learned was that reaching doesn't mean dissolving, that you can love someone with your whole heart and still say, this is who I am, and this is what I need, and I will not disappear to make room for you. I am 63 years old. I raised my son alone. I kept my promise, and I finally got to hold my grandson.